Samadhi is an ancient Sanskrit word for which there's no modern equivalent. There's a fundamental challenge with making a film about Samadhi. Samadhi points to something that can't be conveyed on the level of mind. This film is simply the outer manifestation of my own inner journey. The intention is not to teach you about Samadhi or provide information for your mind, but to inspire you to directly discover your true nature. Samadhi is relevant now more than ever. We are at a time in history where we have not only forgotten Samadhi, but we've forgotten what we forgot. This forgetting is Maya, the illusion of the self. As humans, most of us live immersed in our daily lives, with little thought of who we are, why we are here, or where we're going. Most of us have never realized the true self, the soul, or what the Buddha called anatta, that which is beyond name and form, beyond thinking. As a result, we believe we are these limited bodies. We live in fear, either conscious or unconscious, that the limited self-structure that we are identified with will die. In today's world, the vast majority of people who are engaged in religious or spiritual practices, such as yoga, prayer, meditation, chanting, or any kind of ritual, are practicing techniques which are conditioned, which means they are just part of the ego construct. The seeking and the activity isn't the problem. Thinking you have found the answer in some external form is the problem. Spirituality, in its most common form, is no different than the pathological thinking that is going on everywhere. It is a further agitation of the mind, more human doing as opposed to human being. The ego construct wants more money, more power, more love, more of everything. Those on the so-called spiritual path desire to be more spiritual, more awake, more equanimous, more peaceful, more enlightened. The danger for you watching this film is that your mind will want to acquire Samadhi. Even more dangerous is that your mind might think it has acquired Samadhi. Whenever there's a desire to attain something, you can be sure it's the ego construct at work. Samadhi is not about attaining or adding something more to yourself. To realize Samadhi is to learn to die before you die. Life and death are like yin and yang, an inseparable continuum, endlessly unfolding with no beginning and no end. When we push away death, we also push away life. When you experience the truth directly of who you are, there's no longer any fear of life or death. We're told who we are by our society and our culture. And at the same time, we're slaves to the deeper unconscious biological craving and aversion that governs our choices. The ego construct is nothing more than the impulse to repeat. It's simply the path that energy once took, and the tendency for the energy to take that path again, whether it is positive or negative for the organism. There are endless levels of memory or mind, spirals within spirals. When your consciousness identifies with this mind or ego construct, it ties you to social conditioning, which you could call the matrix. There are aspects of the ego that we can be conscious of, but it's the unconscious, the archaic wiring, the primal existential fears that are actually driving the whole machine. Endless patterns of grasping towards pleasure and avoidance of pain are sublimated into pathological behaviors. Our work, our relationships, our beliefs, our very thoughts, and our whole way of living. Like cattle, most humans live and die in passive subjugation, feeding their lives to the matrix. We live lives locked into narrow patterns, lives often filled with great suffering, and it never occurs to us that we can actually become free. It is possible to let go of the life that has been inherited from the past, to live the one that is waiting to come forth through the inner world. We were all born into this world with biological conditioned structures, but without self-awareness. Often, when you look into a young child's eyes, there's no trace of self, only luminous emptiness. The person one grows into is a mask worn over consciousness. Shakespeare said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." In an awakened individual, consciousness shines through the personality, through the mask. When you are awake, you don't become identified with your character. You don't believe that you are the masks that you are wearing. But nor do you give up playing a role. When we are identified with our character, our persona, this is Maya, the illusion of the self. Samadhi is awakening from the dream of your character in the play of life. "2,400 years after Plato wrote the Republic, humanity is still making its way out of Plato's cave. In fact, we may be more transfixed by illusions than ever. Plato had Socrates describe a group of people who lived chained in a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall. All they could see were shadows projected on the wall by the things passing in front of a fire which was behind them. This puppet show became their world. According to Socrates, the shadows were as close as the prisoners would ever get to seeing reality. Even after being told about the outside world, they continued to believe that the shadows were all that is. Even if they suspected there was something more, they were unwilling to leave what was familiar. Humanity today is like the people who have only seen the shadows on the cave wall. The shadows are analogous to our thoughts. The world of thinking is the only world that we know, but there is another world that's beyond thinking, beyond the dualistic mind. Are you willing to leave the cave? To leave all that you have known, to find out the truth of who you are? In order to experience samadhi, it's necessary to turn attention away from the shadows, away from the thoughts, towards the light. When a person is only used to darkness, then they must gradually become accustomed to the light. Like acclimatizing to any new paradigm, it takes time and effort, and a willingness to explore the new, as well as shed the old. The mind can be likened to a trap for consciousness, a labyrinth or a prison. It is not that you are in prison, you are the prison. The prison is an illusion. If you are identified with an illusory self, then you are asleep. Once you are aware of the prison, if you fight to get out of the illusion, then you're treating the illusion as if it's real, and you still remain asleep. Except now the dream becomes a nightmare. You'll be chasing and running from shadows forever. Samadhi is awakening from the dream of the separate self, or the egoic construct. Samadhi is awakening from identification with the prison that I call me. You can never actually be free because wherever you go, your prison is there. Awakening is not about getting rid of the mind or the matrix. On the contrary, when you're not identified with it, then you can experience the play of life more fully, enjoying the show as it is, without craving or fear. In the ancient teachings, this was called the divine game of Leela, the game of playing in duality. Human consciousness is a continuum. On one extreme, humans are identified with the material self. On the other extreme is samadhi, the cessation of self. Every step we take on the continuum towards samadhi brings less suffering. Less suffering does not mean life is free from pain. Samadhi is beyond the duality of pain and pleasure. What it means is that there is less mind, less self creating resistance to whatever unfolds. And that resistance is what creates suffering. Realizing samadhi even once allows you to see what is at the other end of the continuum, to see that there is something other than the material world and self-interest. When there is an actual cessation of the self-structure in samadhi, there is no egoic thought, no self, no duality, yet there is still the I am, anatta, or no self. In that emptiness is the dawn of prajna, or wisdom. The understanding that the immanent self is far beyond the play of duality, beyond the entire continuum. The immanent self is timeless, unchanging, always now. Enlightenment is the merging of the primordial spiral, the ever-changing manifested world, or lotus, in which time unfolds, with your timeless being. Your inner wiring grows like an ever-unfolding flower as you disidentify with the self, becoming a living bridge between the world of time and the timeless. Merely realizing the immanent self is only the beginning of one's path. Most people will have to experience and lose samadhi countless times in meditation before they are able to integrate it into other facets of life. It's not unusual to have profound insights into the nature of your being during meditation or self-inquiry, only to find yourself once again falling back into old patterns, forgetting the truth of who you are. To realize that stillness or emptiness in every facet of life, every facet of oneself.